In a world without laboratories and plastic bottles, the indigenous peoples of North America developed ingenious methods of purifying water, transforming murky streams into a source of life. Their knowledge was not based on chemistry, but on a deep understanding of nature, where every rock, plant, and ray of sunlight became a tool in the struggle for survival. Watch the video to the end and you will learn how plants that you might consider weeds saved entire tribes from disease. What if I told you that for Native Americans, clean water was not just a matter of survival, but the foundation of the universe? For them, water was a living entity, a sacred gift connecting the world of humans and the world of spirits. It was not just a resource, but a participant in all important rituals and ceremonies. Therefore, purifying water had not only a practical, but also a deep sacred meaning. Clean water meant a clean body and a clean spirit, harmony with the surrounding world. The process of purifying it was a form of respect for nature and its forces. Tribes of the Great Plains, such as the Lakota and Cheyenne, believed that water carried the memory of the land through which it flowed. It absorbed the wisdom of the rocks, the strength of the trees, and the energy of the sun. Therefore, choosing a source was the first and most important step towards purity. They avoided stagnant water not only because of the danger, but also because they considered it asleep or devoid of life force. The flowing, living water of streams and rivers was considered the most valuable. It was this water that they carried to their camps for drinking and cooking. Before taking water from a source, a short prayer was often said or a small offering was made. It was an act of gratitude to the water spirits for their gift. This attitude turned a mundane task into a meaningful action. The transparency of water was associated with clarity of thought and truthfulness. In some cultures, controversial issues were resolved at a clear stream, as it was believed that its proximity helped people speak the truth. Water was a witness and a judge. Illness caused by bad water was not perceived as merely a physical ailment. It was considered a sign of a disturbance in harmony, a signal that people had stopped listening to nature. Treatment began with purification and a return to proper practices. Therefore, the purification methods we will discuss were part of a large system of knowledge. They were passed down from generation to generation, not as dry instructions, but as sacred traditions. They contained the wisdom of the ancestors and the key to survival. This philosophy turned a routine necessity into a daily meditation. Every sip of clean water was a reminder of man's connection to the world. It gave not only physical strength, but also spiritual fortitude. I would be very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think our modern, purely utilitarian attitude to water affects our lives and health? Write about it in the comments. I will reveal the simplest but most underrated secret of clean water, available to everyone. The very first and most basic method of purification used by absolutely all peoples was settling. This method required nothing but time and patience, qualities that Native Americans possessed in abundance. After collecting water from a river or lake, especially after rain, they never drank it immediately. The water was poured into a clay pot, wooden tub, or any other container. Then it was simply left alone for several hours. During this time, a natural sedimentation process took place. Under the force of gravity, heavy particles, sand, silt, clay, and other debris slowly settled to the bottom. The water at the top of the vessel became noticeably clearer. This method was especially important for tribes living near large, slow-moving rivers such as the Missouri. The waters of this river carried a huge amount of suspended matter, giving it a cloudy brown color. Settling was the only way to make it drinkable. After the water had settled, the second, equally important stage began: decanting. This is the process of carefully pouring off the clean upper layer of water so as not to disturb the sediment that had settled at the bottom. This required a steady hand and great care. Often a special horn scoop or a gourd ladle was used for this purpose. They slowly and smoothly scooped water from the surface, trying not to touch the bottom. At the same time, they tried not to tilt the vessel so as not to stir up the sediment. Sometimes a more cunning technique was used. A small hole was made in the wall of the clay vessel, slightly above the middle, which was plugged with a wooden stopper. When the water settled, the stopper was removed and the clean water flowed out on its own, leaving all the sediment at the bottom. This simple method significantly improved the quality of the water. It removed visible dirt, making the water more pleasant to taste and safer. Although it did not kill germs, removing the silt particles also removed some of the bacteria associated with them. Patience was the key to the whole process. The Indians understood that you cannot rush nature. The ability to wait for the water to purify itself was part of their harmonious worldview. But what if there is no time to wait and water is needed right now? In the next chapter, you will learn how indigenous peoples created complex engineering systems for rapid purification using only what was at their feet. What I am about to show you resembles modern multi-stage filters, but it was created hundreds of years ago without a single metal tool. When they needed to quickly purify large amounts of water, Native Americans built earthen filters. It was an ingenious system that mimicked natural purification processes. First, a suitable location on the bank of a river or stream was chosen. A pit was dug a few steps away from the water. The depth and size of the pit depended on how much water was needed. The filtration process itself took place through layers of soil. Water from the river, seeping through sand, gravel, and earth, was naturally purified of suspended particles. In the dug pit, it appeared much cleaner and clearer. This method was especially effective on sandy and gravelly soils. The longer the water traveled through the ground, the better it was filtered. Therefore, the pit was never dug too close to the water's edge. Sometimes this system was complicated and improved. If the soil was clayey and did not allow water to pass through well, the Indians created an artificial filter. They dug two pits next to each other, one closer to the river, the other further away. Then they dug a shallow trench between the pits. This trench was filled with layers of filtering materials. First, they laid large stones, then gravel, then coarse sand, and finally fine sand on top. Water from the river was poured into the first pit. Passing through the man-made filter trench, it was purified and collected in the second pit. It was a real engineering system, working on the principle of communicating vessels. Such a filter allowed you to quickly obtain clean water for a whole family or a small group. It removed not only turbidity, but also unpleasant odors. After such purification, the water became cool and fresh to the taste. For additional purification, a layer of charcoal from a fire could be placed at the bottom of the second pit. Charcoal, as we will learn later, has unique properties. This made the system even more effective. Creating such a filter required an understanding of the basics of hydraulics and soil science. This knowledge was not recorded in books. It was the result of centuries of observation of nature and was passed down from father to son. Are you ready to learn the truth about simple charcoal from a fire, which works better than many modern chemicals? The use of charcoal was perhaps the most advanced water purification technology among Native Americans. They intuitively discovered the principle of adsorption, which is used today in the most modern filters. Charcoal has a porous structure similar to a sponge. This structure gives it a huge surface area. 1 gram of activated charcoal can have a surface area equal to that of a football field. It is this porous surface that works its black magic. It acts like a magnet, attracting and trapping various impurities, chemicals, and compounds that cause unpleasant tastes and odors in its pores. This process is called adsorption, as opposed to absorption, where a substance is simply absorbed. To obtain charcoal, Native Americans did not simply burn wood. They created conditions for slow combustion with limited oxygen access. To do this, they covered the fire with earth or sand, forcing the wood to char rather than burn. Hardwoods, such as oak or hickory, were considered the best raw materials. The charcoal produced from them was dense and had a more developed porous structure. After cooling, large pieces of charcoal were crushed into fine crumbs or powder. Crushed charcoal was used in several ways. It could simply be poured into a container of water, stirred, and allowed to settle. The charcoal absorbed impurities and then settled to the bottom with them. A more advanced method was to create a charcoal filter. The charcoal powder was wrapped in cloth or placed in a porous leather bag. Water was then slowly passed through this improvised cartridge. Charcoal was also added to the multi-layer earth filters we talked about earlier. A layer of crushed charcoal laid between layers of sand significantly improved the quality of purification. It removed impurities that the sand could not handle. This method was especially valuable when the water had a swampy or rotten taste. Charcoal effectively neutralized organic compounds. making the water not only safer, but also tastier. It was real alchemy, accessible to everyone. Knowledge about the properties of charcoal was part of a broader understanding of the chemistry of nature. Native Americans knew which charcoal was best, how to prepare it properly, and how to use it. It was a science honed by thousands of experiments. But filters remove dirt and odors. But what about the invisible threat of microbes? In the next chapter, you will learn how indigenous peoples boiled water without even having metal kettles that could withstand open fire. Boiling is the most reliable way to destroy virtually all disease-causing microorganisms in water. To modern people, this process seems elementary. Pour water into a pot and put it on the fire. But before contact with Europeans, indigenous peoples did not have metal kettles that could withstand direct flame. Their clay pots were fragile and cracked over an open fire. Woven baskets coated with resin or vessels made of bark and wood would have burned completely. However, they found an ingenious solution that allowed them to bring water to a boil in any container. This method is known as stone boiling. It required two things: a container for water and a fire. The essence of the method was to heat not the vessel with water, but the water itself from within. A hot fire was lit next to the container of water. Smooth, dense stones the size of a fist were placed in the fire. It was important to choose stones without cracks and not made of porous rock so that they would not split from the heat. The stones were heated in the fire until they were red hot. This process could take from 30 minutes to an hour. The temperature of the stones reached several hundred degrees. Then, using two sticks as tongs, the hot stone was quickly removed from the fire. It was dipped into another container of water for a moment to wash off the ash. After that, the stone was carefully lowered into the main vessel with water intended for boiling. When the hot stone came into contact with cold water, a violent reaction occurred. The water around the stone instantly boiled, hissed, and evaporated, filling the air with thick steam. It was an impressive sight. One stone gave off its heat and cooled down. It was taken out and returned to the fire, and the next hot stone was placed in its place. By repeating this procedure several times, it was possible to bring the entire volume of water to a boil. In this way, water could be boiled in anything: a hollowed-out log, a pit lined with animal skin, or a thick woven basket. The method was versatile and incredibly effective. After boiling, the water was kept hot for several more minutes to ensure that all germs were destroyed. This laborious but reliable process was the main way of obtaining safe drinking water. It required skill and knowledge of the properties of stones, but it saved countless lives. A secret passed down from generation to generation: which plants in the forest can make water safer? For Native Americans, the forest was not only their home, but also their pharmacy and pantry. They knew the properties of hundreds of plants and knew how to use them for a variety of purposes, including water purification. Some plants have antiseptic and antibacterial properties. They were added to water not for filtration, but for disinfection. It was a kind of natural chemical purification. One such plant was willow. Its bark and young branches contain salicylates, natural compounds similar to aspirin. These substances have weak antimicrobial properties. A bunch of willow branches could be placed in a vessel with water and left for several hours. It was believed that this not only made the water safer, but also gave it healing properties. Of course, this did not replace boiling, but it was a good additional measure. Another powerful natural antiseptic was sphagnum moss, which is often found in swamps. This moss is capable of absorbing a huge amount of water and has pronounced antibacterial properties. It has been used for centuries as a dressing material. Dry sphagnum could be used as a filter by passing water through it. The moss not only trapped mechanical impurities, but also suppressed the growth of certain bacteria. Water passed through such a filter remained fresh longer. Some tribes use the fruits or bark of certain plants as coagulants. Coagulants are substances that cause small suspended particles in water to stick together into larger flakes. These flakes then quickly settle to the bottom, making the water clear. For example, crushed seeds from certain types of cacti in the southwest could be used for this purpose. A pinch of powder was added to cloudy water, stirred, and after a short time, all the cloudiness settled to the bottom. This significantly accelerated the settling process. It is important to understand that this knowledge was strictly specific to each region. Eastern forest tribes used some plants, while desert dwellers used completely different ones. It was a complex science based on local resources. The use of plants required accurate identification and knowledge of dosage. A mistake could result in the water becoming bitter or even poisonous. These secrets were kept and passed on by the tribe's herbalists and healers. But what if there is no fire for boiling and no suitable plants at hand? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of purifying water using the most powerful and cleanest source of energy on the planet, the sun. Even in situations where it was impossible to build a fire or find the necessary plants, indigenous peoples had another powerful ally, nature itself. They knew how to use the energy of the sun and the power of the wind to improve water quality. These methods were simple but required an understanding of the laws of nature. One such method was aeration. This is the process of saturating water with oxygen from the air. Aeration does not kill microbes directly, but it significantly improves the taste and smell of water, especially if it has been stagnant. For aeration, water was repeatedly poured from one vessel to another from a great height. A wide, flat vessel could also be used to increase the area of contact between the water and the air. This helped dissolve gases, such as hydrogen sulfide, which give water an unpleasant odor, to evaporate. Moreover, oxygen is lethal to anaerobic bacteria, microorganisms that live in an oxygen-free environment and are often the cause of putrefactive processes. Saturating water with oxygen suppressed their growth. It was a simple way to freshen the water. Another, even more powerful method was the use of sunlight. Today, this method is known as solar disinfection, or the SODIS method. Ultraviolet radiation in sunlight is a powerful natural disinfectant. Indigenous peoples intuitively understood this power. They placed water in shallow, open containers in direct sunlight for a whole day. This could be a wide clay tray, a hollowed-out trough, or even a turtle shell. The ultraviolet rays in sunlight damage the DNA of bacteria and viruses, making them unable to reproduce. The heat of the sun also accelerates this process. After 6 to 8 hours in bright sunlight, the water became much safer. Of course, they did not know about the existence of bacteria and ultraviolet rays. They simply saw the result. Water that had been exposed to the sun was less likely to cause disease. This was knowledge gained through trial and error. This method was especially common in southern, sunny regions, such as modern-day Arizona and New Mexico. Where the sun shines almost year-round, it became the primary means of purification. These simple but effective methods show how deeply indigenous peoples were integrated into their environment. They did not fight nature, but used its own laws for their needs. The sun and wind were their free and always available water purification station. For tribes living in the northern forests and on the northern edges of the Great Plains, winter brought with it a special source of clean water: snow and ice. When rivers and lakes were frozen over and the ground was covered with snow, they became the main source of drinking water. However, there were rules and tricks to this as well. It would seem that nothing could be simpler than collecting snow and melting it. But the Indians knew that not all snow was equally good. They never used the bottom layer of snow lying on the ground, as it could be mixed with dirt and dry leaves. They also avoided old compacted snow. Over time, it could accumulate pollutants from the air and lose its freshness. The best snow was considered to be freshly fallen, clean, and fluffy snow, which was collected from the top layer of snowdrifts. The process of melting snow also had its own peculiarities. If you simply fill a pot with snow and place it over a fire, the bottom layer will quickly melt and evaporate, and the pot itself may burn through. Therefore, they did things differently. First, they poured a little water into the pot. Then they gradually added snow to this water in small portions. The snow melted in the water without coming into contact with the hot bottom of the pot, which made the process more efficient and safer for the cookware. Ice was also an excellent source of clean water, but here too it was important to make the right choice. Cloudy, porous ice, especially that formed at the beginning of winter, could contain frozen particles of silt and bacteria. People tried not to use it. The most valuable ice was clear, bluish ice that formed on fast-flowing rivers or in the depths of large lakes. The structure of this ice was similar to that of distilled water. During the slow freezing process, water naturally pushes most impurities out of its crystal lattice. To obtain such ice, a hole was cut in the ice, and large transparent blocks were cut out. These blocks were brought to the dwelling and left to melt at room temperature. The resulting water was exceptionally pure and tasty. The ability to find and properly use clean snow and ice was a critical survival skill in harsh winter conditions. It allowed them to avoid dependence on frozen and potentially contaminated rivers. Winter, which was a time of hardship for many, became a source of the purest water for them. All of the purification methods listed above would be useless without the most important, fundamental skill, the ability to choose the right water source. The first step to clean water is to find it in the purest form possible. Native Americans were masters at reading the landscape and knew how to find the best sources. They knew that water in a fast, cold stream flowing over a rocky bottom is almost always cleaner than in a slow, flat river with muddy banks. Fast currents and rocks promote natural aeration and self-purification of the water. Oxygen and sunlight penetrating to the bottom inhibit the growth of many microorganisms. When choosing a place to drink from a river, they always went upstream from animal camps or trails leading to the watering hole. They understood that animals pollute the water. This simple rule of hygiene saved them from many intestinal diseases. They also avoided taking water downstream from their own camp or other people's camps. The place for collecting drinking water was always upstream, and the place for washing and other domestic needs was downstream. This strict zoning was an unbreakable law for any camp. The vegetation around the source could also tell a lot about the quality of the water. Thick, healthy growths of certain plants indicated a constant supply of moisture. However, some types of plants, on the contrary, signaled stagnant, swampy water that was unfit for drinking. Even the color and smell of the water were important indicators. Any unnatural color, iridescent film on the surface, or putrid smell were clear signs that this water was best left untouched. Their senses were a finely tuned instrument for assessing quality. Observing animal behavior also provided valuable information. Some animals are very sensitive to water quality and will only drink from the cleanest sources. The places they chose to drink were often the best for humans as well. In desert regions, finding water became a real art. People found hidden springs by barely noticeable signs. Clusters of certain insects, the direction of birds flying at dawn, or a barely noticeable patch of greenery among dry rocks. This ability to find clean water was not just a set of signs, it was a deep, holistic understanding of the ecosystem. They did not just live in nature, they were part of it and spoke the same language. Purifying water is only half the battle. An equally important task was to keep it clean during storage and transportation. Therefore, the vessels in which water was carried and stored were not just containers, but an important part of the life support system. The materials for making vessels were chosen very carefully. In forest areas, birch bark was often used. It was used to make lightweight, waterproof buckets and boxes, the seams of which were coated with fir resin. The tribes of California and the Great Basin were skilled weavers. They made baskets from willow twigs and plant roots that were so dense that they did not leak water. Often, to ensure complete watertightness, they were coated with pine resin on the inside. In the Great Plains, where bison were the main resource, the best containers for water were the treated stomachs and bladders of these animals. After thorough cleaning and drying, they were turned into light and durable water skins that were convenient to carry during migrations. For sedentary tribes engaged in agriculture, such as the Iroquois or Pueblo peoples, clay was the main material. They created a variety of clay jugs and pots. The porous structure of fired clay had an interesting effect. As it evaporated from the surface, the water slightly cooled the contents of the vessel. The cleanliness of these vessels was maintained with particular care. They were regularly washed and dried in the sun. Sunlight, as we already know, is an excellent disinfectant. For additional disinfection, the vessels could be rinsed with decoctions of plants with antiseptic properties, such as wormwood or juniper. This not only cleaned the water, but also gave it a light, pleasant aroma. Fresh, clean water was never mixed with water that had been standing for some time. Old water was used for household needs, and fresh water was always brought in for drinking. This simple rule helped to prevent the growth of bacteria. Water vessels were always kept closed to prevent debris, dust, or insects from getting into them. Pieces of bark, flat stones, or woven mats served as lids. This was the last but very important step in the process of maintaining purity. Thus, from the selection of the source to the last sip from the vessel, the entire process was subject to a single goal: to keep the gift of water clean and life-giving. It was a system refined over centuries, in which there were no trifles. Each stage was equally important for the health and well-being of the entire tribe. We have looked at just a few of the many ways in which the indigenous peoples of America provided themselves with clean water. Behind each of these methods, from simple settling to complex charcoal filtration, lies not just a set of skills, but an entire philosophy. It is a philosophy of harmony with nature, based on observation, patience, and a deep respect for the world around us. This knowledge shows that complex technologies are not always necessary for survival and prosperity. Sometimes the most effective solutions are right under our feet. The main thing is to be able to see, understand, and gratefully use what nature gives us. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of ancient cultures.